right, with permission, I'll get started. I think I see permission. So I just want to introduce our speaker. Thanks for being here, definitely on a Friday. I'm Marcus King. I'm a jointly appointed professor between the School of Foreign Service and Earth Commons. And I direct a new master's program in Environment and International Affairs that we just started. And so my honor today is to introduce Elizabeth Chalecki, who's going to be giving our talk, obviously. She's an associate professor of international relations at the University of Nebraska Omaha, a research fellow in the Environmental Change and Security Program at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and a research chair with Fulbright Canada. So her expertise lies on climate change and security, international environmental policy, at the intersection of science and technology and international affairs. And she's authored groundbreaking research on geoengineering and security, just war, and has published 25 books, articles, and book chapters on such diverse topics as climate change and Arctic security, environmental terrorism, climate change and international law, and water in outer space. She also serves as an environmental security subject matter expert for NATO, has taught at Boston College, Cal State, Monterey Institute of International Studies, and has worked at Environment Canada, U.S. Department of Commerce, and at the Brookings Institution. She has a Ph.D. in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, where we actually first met. We were in very similar cohorts at the time, both studying environmental security. And I have to say her work's been very influential on my teaching for many years. And she has a master's in environmental geography from the University of Toronto. And she also directs a new sustainability program at the University of Nebraska Omaha.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me all okay, because I'm probably going to be moving around, but not too much, because I noticed while Marcus was introducing me, the word geo was projected on his head. So I'm going to try to maybe stay out of the frame here. Hi to everybody on Zoom. I hope you can hear me all right. This microphone should be picking me up okay. It was actually born out of some of the work I was doing with NATO, some of the wargaming, some of the strategic foresight analysis, the positioning of climate change as a national security issue that led me to start questioning the idea of sovereignty when it came to international affairs and how the school of thought named Realists, how they're given sort of the Amenas Greece position in international affairs. They cannot cope with this new threat. And I began to think about how we might be able to reformulate international relations, if we could, to consider, well, we have this existential threat coming down on us. How do we change our intellectual frameworks to do this, right? Doesn't seem like that big a job. Wow, did I get pushed back? Okay, that just whetted my appetite, right? As Marcus and I were muttering up here earlier, I'm known in my classes for cold calling on students. So at some point I might point to one of you and say, what's the answer to X? So just get ready, all right? All right, skip the. Okay, there we go. That's the way to do it. Very well. Every time we pick up some scientific journal regarding climate, or even New York Times, the Washington Post, we are getting yet another story about how climate change is proceeding faster than we ever thought it would. Faster every time we look at something. When are we going to be ice free in the Arctic? When are we going to run out of water in Cape Town? When is the Sahel going to keep marching south? Where will it stop? Every time we see this, we see new predictions of doom, right? I've never seen one of these indicators get better. So we need to look this squarely in the face. We need to be able to look at a graph like this one from Berkeley Earth, showing us temperature anomalies increasing from 1860, shortly after the Industrial Revolution began, all the way out to 2021, it looks like I have. And this is going in one direction. This is pretty dire here. So any type of international relations, any type of way that nations get along together in the international system must be based with this in mind. All of our theories, realism, liberalism, the critiques of feminists, the critiques of Marxists, it's all based on the idea that international relations is based on some stable environmental backdrop, and states move around like chess pieces, but the board doesn't change. Now, what if the board is shrinking? What if the board is becoming all black or all white? What if the squares are moving around? What if the pieces can't move the way they used to? None of international relations theory takes this into account, particularly not the key one of realism, that every other theory in international relations has to answer to. So when we look at a graph like this, and these are error bars, by the way, which are larger when we had not as good temperature measuring technology. Now we can measure it quite specifically. We can see where this is headed. The theory of anthropogenic global warming shows us why we're going this way. We are changing our land use. We are continuing to use fossil fuels with abandon in every country around the world. And this graph is going nowhere but up. Not only is it going up, the rate of going up is going up. The rate itself is increasing. So the IPCC has given us until the end of this decade to bend this carbon curve downward. This is the carbon curve, this is the temperature anomaly curve with their track. We have till the end of 6 years. Can we do this in 6 years? This is a major industrial and economic shift in the way the whole economy works. How can we do this? Well, we are going to have to reconsider how nations get along with one another. By the way, no state is unaffected here. Even the states that will benefit in the short term, like Russia and Canada, and the United States to some degree, will suffer in the long term if we don't address this issue. All right, let's look at our friend realism. Main tenet of realism is that national power is military power. This was born way back in the day with Sun Tzu, and armies and weapons were the only ways that states could affect one another, the only ways they could change one another's behavior or damage one another to the point where their power would increase. So the tenet that says national interest and national security is military power, we still hang on to this. When you think of a powerful nation, you think of an army. And this map right here shows you military expenditure for 2020. Now, I was digging around last night trying to get it to run a time series and it wouldn't do it, but it doesn't matter because the figures for most countries are going up. The United States spends more on its military than every other country in the world put together. Roughly $780 billion per year. So we have a big forward presence, and this is why we are considered the global hegemon, the hegemon being the state that is the most powerful in the world. More military forces, however, are grappling with the idea of what climate change is going to mean for their operations. We're going to see more heat waves. We're going to see more droughts and floods, sometimes at the same time of year, sometimes in the same place, not at the same time of year. We're going to see more extreme weather events like storms and hurricanes and typhoons. We're going to see more heat waves due to increasing temperatures, changes in precipitation. We're going to see a melting Arctic, and we're going to see sea level rise around the world. What does this mean for the armed forces who have to operate in these theaters? What does this mean for the bases and the runways and the infrastructure that they are trying to build around the world? Well, they're going to have to grapple with this somehow. You would think when you spend $777 billion a year that you would have a division devoted to this, but no. They are just coming around to thinking, hey, the climate is changing, this is going to affect our jobs. And not just their operability, but the kinds of missions that they're sent on. They might be able to fight another army or maybe a guerrilla force. But what happens when the infrastructure they rely on is melting? Oh, and they have to go rescue a number of refugees out of a particular area because seawater has taken over their drinking water. They need to be evacuated out of that area. They have to plan for all of this. The military might be working on this, but the international relations theorists who determine what national power is don't have an answer for this. They still measure power and prestige in terms of high politics, which is military politics, which is weapons and space weapons and nuclear missiles and all that stuff. Sounds cool if you're a military, if you're an IR theorist, but to somebody who studies climate change, this is bonkers. You don't want to be spending money on this stuff, right? U.S. National Security Strategy of 2022 is finally admitting that the climate crisis is the existential challenge of our time. I'm not going to read this whole quote for you. You can read it faster than I can talk. But the EU is on this, China is on this, Russia's on this, India's on this, all of the large powers around the world, and coalitions like the EU are grappling with what to do about the climate security so-called nexus. How do we take our traditional ideas of security and adapt them to a changing climate? Unfortunately, most of the stuff is still happening on paper right now. So when it comes to realism tenet number 1, I'm giving that one a thumbs down. They are not addressing the climate change. They are not changing the idea of national interest away from military power, or primarily military power. Realism tenet number 2, the international system is anarchic. And this UN right here, this is a ball of nonsense. If you're a realist, this is window dressing. Yeah, you might want to join the UN, looks great, but don't actually take it seriously. Yeah, sign treaties if you want to, but don't actually abide by them the minute they inconvenience you or get in the way if you're developing your military power. Drop that thing like it's hot. So the UN, for all we put a lot of faith in it, and I'm a UN fan myself, I would like to put faith in it as well. Its primary job is to maintain peace and security. It's done kind of a middling job about that. Anarchy doesn't mean complete chaos in the international system. Anarchy means that there is no overarching authority to make states do certain things, to make them desist invading a neighbor, to make them meet their carbon mitigation goals, to make them abide by a fishing treaty. The UN is not that body. It's all advisory. So if you are a member of the UN, yeah, it looks great. Don't let it slow your roll at all. UNEP, the UN Environment Program, and the IPCC, which is an auxiliary arm of the UN, they cannot force states to abide by any kind of climate mitigation restriction. So for this tenet of international relations, I would give that a wash. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is what you see with the ecological outcome of sovereignty. This is greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions, and land use changes. So you start to see, on average, how much CO2 countries are emitting. China overtook the United States at some point in the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007, 2008, I don't exactly know when, but right around there, the United States is starting to flatten out its emissions, drop them a little bit, and China's has taken off hugely. Guaranteed, ladies and gentlemen, each one of you is wearing something, carrying something, drove something, or is eating something from China today. Guaranteed. This gentleman's just gonna have his food right here. It might be from China, maybe, but your car probably is. The US, all 28 countries of the EU, India, Russia, Brazil, the low-income countries, they're flattening out their emissions. Not India so much. That's another issue. India feels that it's their turn to occupy the carbon space and that the EU and the United States need to get out of it now. We've been there long enough, we've created enough problems, and we got rich doing it. So as far as they're concerned, it's their turn. China basically is supplying the rest of the world with goods and services. And these are carbon intensive goods and services. It's not paradoxical actually that they are both the world's largest emitter and the world's largest exporter, producer and exporter of solar panels and wind turbines. They're by far the largest consumer of coal. This is not strange under the international system because it is anarchic. Same reason why states go to COP29 is the last COP in Sharm. And so they're talking about how we need to cut carbon emissions. Meanwhile, on the side, they're making more oil deals. The system is anarchic. Every state is going to feel this, but nobody is forcing states to abide. So for this tenet of realism, pro and con with this one. Tenet number 3, other states are untrustworthy. Pictures are from Ukraine. And what I thought was interesting when I began reading in the news, as everyone did, about the invasion of Ukraine, that in 1994, the United States, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum. Article 1 stated that these other states would respect Ukraine's borders and sovereignty. Article 2 said no one will attack Ukraine. This was in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, which it had as part of the Soviet Union. States are untrustworthy. Previous principle tells us so. So if they're gonna be part of the UN but not really take it seriously, or sign treaties but not abide by the terms, or leave the treaty when it gets inconvenient, they are untrustworthy. So how do we deal with climate when every state regards every other one with suspicion? This is difficult to do. This is difficult to do. So I would give this one a wash as well. States don't have to be untrustworthy, but they will be if in action they perceive it as against their interest. How do we make fighting climate change against everybody, in everybody's interest? Well, do it. Tenet number 4, national security is zero sum. It is all relative between states. Every bit of security I gain is a little bit you lose and vice versa. And if I gain a whole bunch, everybody else better band together, because that means you just lost a lot. So these are various photos here of the vaccines being distributed by COVAX. Anybody remember what COVAX was? COVAX was the UN's joint vaccine development program for COVID. Started in 2020. And it basically said any states who wanted to put in money, pool resources, pool scientific knowledge, pool funds, we're going to develop this and then equitably share vaccines. Because of course we know that the developed countries were going to have a leg up on vaccine distribution, production and distribution. The countries with the scientific prowess, the United States, Russia, China, the EU, they were the ones who were going to have the vaccine first. This is patently unfair to other countries who were just as affected by COVID, but didn't have the scientific wherewithal to develop their own vaccine. So the UN stepped in good liberal fashion and said, we are going to put together a program by which you can pitch in, and then we'll distribute the vaccines equally. So here's the first load of COVAX vaccines going to Ghana in 2021. Nothing about COVAX said that you needed to stop your own national program. You just pitched into the UN's program. It failed completely, because states were still wrapped up in this idea of sovereignty. They were still wrapped up in the idea that my country had to have it first. And I'm going to inoculate everybody before anybody else across any border gets it. This is a water treatment plant here, and this little cutout here of a hacker. Did anybody see in the Washington Post, I think it was a day or two ago, about the water plant in Texas that was hacked by a group claiming to work for the Russians? Now, I don't know if they really do work for the Russians. That sounds kind of grandiose, to attack a water tower. But a water purification plant in Texas was hacked because all of this critical infrastructure, water purification, sanitation, traffic systems, air traffic control, energy systems, they're all controlled by computer. So if you're an enterprising hacker, you can get into somebody's system and shut down their key infrastructure. How do we fight this? Not on an individual basis. And by the way, this happened in the United States, it happened in France, and it happened in Poland. The same water hackers claim to have hit all 3 of these countries. Right up there, that is a geoengineering test balloon. Some of you might recognize that. This was a Harvard experiment that was designed to test injection of aerosols into the stratosphere. The mere fact that states are considering geoengineering as a response to climate change shows that this system of realism is bankrupt when it comes to the climate system. Geoengineering, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is a method, there's 2 methods of geoengineering. The one pictured here is designed to put particulates, sulfur particulates, up in the stratosphere, kind of like a volcanic eruption would, to block sunlight out of the atmosphere. Ostensibly, this lowers the temperature, as it would after a volcanic eruption. This is what happens after every volcanic eruption, if it's big enough. So now we can do it without the volcano, or at least in theory we can. This experiment eventually was canceled, or postponed, I should say, because they argued that the people that were trying to do it didn't consult with the native population of the territory they were trying to do it in. So they tried it in the United States, it was postponed. They tried it in Sweden, it was postponed. I think they're looking to do it somewhere else. In and of itself, it's not going to have any effect. It's a tiny little proof of concept experiment. But the idea is that we cannot cooperate to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, we have to block sunlight out of the atmosphere. All of these areas are where we can make common security gains. If nations work together, they can protect themselves against a serious security threat. Tenet number 4 is also thumbs down. And I want to show you 2 climate futures, ladies and gentlemen. This is from the IPCC. Because it's the IPCC, they geeked out on the science, but I'm going to summarize it for you for the non-scientists in the room. This is the change in average surface temperature between the end of last century and the end of this century. This one is renewable energy Earth. This is what the temperature increase is going to look like if we use these last 6 years the UN has given us to bend this carbon curve downward and keep it down. leave the oil and coal and gas in the ground, and we go hard for renewable energy. Hard for solar, hard for wind, geothermal, tidal, even nuclear. It's not renewable, but it's carbon free if it's done correctly. If we do that, we are still looking at some pretty significant warming. Over land, more so in the Arctic, you're in this range over here. That's still gonna be hella hot. To a human, 2 degrees, no big deal. But to an ecosystem, this is enormous. And so if we are living with this level of warming, slowly increased over the course of a century, we might be able to adapt. We might be able to still have concepts like nationalism and democracy and individual rights. The United States might still exist as a country under toasty brown earth, as we call it. That's fossil fuel earth. That's what's going to happen if we keep using oil the way we are, if we keep and coal the way we are, if we keep emitting greenhouse gases the way we are. This is what frightens the geoengineers when they see this earth. You're looking here, and it's a little hard to tell because of the projector, but you're looking here at overland increases of between 5 to 7 degrees Celsius. I live in an agricultural state right now, Nebraska. And when I showed my students this, they gasped. And I said, imagine what this is going to do to an agricultural economy. Imagine what this is going to do to the water supply, where you want to try to grow the things you've been growing. And one woman looked at this, grad student, and she said, is this world even habitable? I said, I don't know. That is a really good question because the earth has never been this hot while humans have been on it. So we don't really know what this is going to look like. The Arctic is off the charts warm. That's 11, 12 degrees centigrade, maybe higher. Now we start to see larger warming over land. We start to see warming over the ocean. You start to see warming over Antarctica, and if the East Antarctic ice sheet goes, that's the potential, and Marcus can correct me if I'm wrong with this figure, but that's the potential for 100 meters of sea level rise. 100 meters of sea level rise. So this choice is up to us, really. And there's all kinds of things we can do as individuals. There's things we can do with our states. There's things we can do with our country or states in the international system. But when you work at the level of the international system, realists pretend they don't see this. They pretend that, well, we'll just continue with our weapons and our high politics and our states not trusting one another because another state might gain a little more security than they have now, which would imperil me. And number 4, security is not zero sum. Any ecologist will be able to tell you this. Now, where does this leave us? Have we torn realism apart irrevocably? No, I don't think we have. Realism isn't going anywhere. Concepts like sovereignty, concepts like economic development, these will remain because this is how humans understand to arrange themselves at the international level. We're not just going to flip some switch and all of a sudden everybody becomes eco-minded, as cool as that would be. That's not going to work. But if you make like the realists and you leave climate and ecological stability to the side as you pursue your high politics and your weapons and your submarines and so on, then you are imperiling your own country's security. Every realist from Sun Tzu down to Henry Kissinger will tell you that this isn't morally minded stuff. This isn't high-minded fantasy or Pollyanna. This is practicality and prudence pursuing your national security. They're just stuck in the weapons age. We can redo realism so it takes the ecology into account. If we could center the environment in security, center a functioning and stable ecosystem as the state's key security value, what would that look like? Well, renewable energy becomes nationally available. Every country can do something with renewable energy, maybe not the same type, but they can do something with some form of renewable energy. Then the whole idea of the oil trade becomes less useful. The whole idea of energy insecurity, or the whole concept of energy insecurity, is suddenly not as threatening. If I can produce most of my electricity domestically, why am I worried about the price of oil? Why do I have to have alliances with objectionable neighbors? Why do I have to commit to a greenhouse gas mitigation regime? Well, because it's going to serve you in the future. Public health cooperation increases. We saw the destructive effects of vaccine nationalism during the COVID-19 pandemic. What if we didn't have to worry about that? What if we didn't have to worry about the disease tamping potential of the ecosystem being disrupted? We still don't really know where COVID came from. But if we could treat the ecosystem with respect, there's fewer chances for zoonotic diseases to break out into the human population. Fewer civil conflicts. Think of all the effects that climate change is going to have on states and within states. Food insecurity, decreasing public health, decreasing water supplies, increasing heat waves. All of these things that make people angry. All of these things that the realists would say, you don't want your people to be angry, you want them to fear you, not hate you. But if you can't provide for them or allow them to provide for themselves because the environment is crushing you, then they will hate you. And you will end up with civil conflicts or worse. If the nation is developing with the environment in mind, a lot less potential for this to happen. And there's no government in the world that doesn't want to stay in power. So logically, working with the environment instead of against it will keep you in power. Sounds like a realist dream. Ecological realism, ladies and gentlemen. I've set up 4 tenets of this new theory. Number 1, ecological integrity is necessary to the survival of every state. It's a little hard to read where they're over the top of the earth, but it's necessary to the survival. This becomes high politics. Not manly weapons, not nuclear missiles. Whose missile's bigger? No. It's whose ecosystem is more stable. Who is working with the environment and not against it. That becomes high politics. Then if you still have to have weapons, that's low politics. The key security value becomes environmental and climate stability. Number 2, threats to the environment are threats to security. Although Leopold wouldn't have put it this way when he articulated the land ethic, in which he said anything that is good for the land and anything bad is bad for the land. But that's the practical security focused implication of his land ethic. Threats to the environment are threats to security. If my security rests on the environment, I'm not going to let anything threaten it. Tenet number 3, anarchy is selective. Again, maybe this argues for more ecologists in government, I don't know. But if you know that your water is connected to your neighbor's water and your air is downstream from them or downwind from them, and you know that heat waves don't stop at borders, then your anarchy, your sovereignty needs less and less. We're already seeing modern globalization and scientific and technological developments eroding sovereignty as it is. Now we need to recognize that your sovereignty is not going to help you and in fact may imperil you. Number 4, national security is positive sum. If the environment is the key value, restoring a forest, cleaning up a river, cooling the earth, removing carbon dioxide and sequestering it, trying to stave off a heat wave. All of these provide security for multiple nations, and this is not a bad thing. So we get rid of this zero-sum mindset. Any ecologist will tell you that's nonsense from the get-go. Famous realist, John Mearsheimer. Great powers cannot commit themselves to the pursuit of a peaceful world order. States are unlikely to agree on a general formula for bolstering peace. Certainly, international relations scholars have never reached a consensus on what the blueprint should look like. I argue they're not trying hard enough. This is an imagination fail. It's not just a climate fail, which, by the way, was spelled out in LED lights in front of the Canadian Parliament after the Copenhagen failure. The Copenhagen, COP in Copenhagen, that was supposed to replace Kyoto, 2009, failed utterly because states couldn't agree on what to do about climate. So Greenpeace Canada got fed up and they spelled out climate fail on lights in front of the Parliament in Ottawa. Then somebody got a shot of it from a drone. Love this photo. This is an imagination fail on our part. So I would like to dethrone these traditional realists from their pinnacle of power in international affairs and replace them with the ecological realists. And I think our students would like to see this as well, because they're the ones that are going to be living with the potential for scary red earth. We can do this. We just have to do it. So here's some things to read. If anybody wants the obligatory literature review, here it is. I have others I can recommend to you if you wish. And these gentlemen clearly have not given enough thought to the effects of global warming. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. That's done you all sounds. No, excellent. 1, 2.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate this. I like you sort of holding up how utterly idealistic realism really is. Like, let's do the same thing we've always done and hope it works out okay, right? Like, there's nothing more unrealistic in some ways than that. I wonder though if the move you're making to ecological realism still stays within the kind of securitization discourse. And that feels to me like it could limit some of the realities we'll see in a rapidly changing world. Have you looked in at all to the environmental peace building paradigm, which has started to move a little bit away from the top-down parachute in professionalism and starting to look more from the ground up as around nodes of solidarity and community engagement and building a different kind of discourse into these
The Concord-Nebelka theory.
Exactly.
Yeah, environment. Yes, I do. I know both of those gentlemen. I like them both very much. And I understand what they're trying to get to with the bottom up. I don't think it's either that or this. I think you're gonna have to do both of these. So if we are gonna be building community from the bottom up, ecologically minded community, let's do it. Don't even wait for that. Like, who cares what I'm saying? Do it, right? But for the people that are still looking at the realists and saying, well, clearly they're dictating or they're advising on how we should behave at the upper levels of government, the international levels, we need to change that mind frame too. So maybe they meet in the middle someplace, but we don't have time. We need to be attacking this problem on all fronts, right? I mean, I'm with you with Concord and Nebelka. I see where they're going and I like it, but we also need to do this. We also need to reframe this idea of security, because states, in the time we have to deal with climate change, will still think of security as the primary value. We just need to refocus the referent of security from my missiles are bigger than yours to my river is cleaner than yours.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yes, but I hear you. I'm with you. Yes, question.
So my question is more so to do with finances, like war generates profit. So it's really easy to say we want to reduce
Profit
conflict.
for some people.
For some people,
Yeah.
yes, for big superpowers. So how do you sort of factor, yes, these solutions are really easy and probably common sense, but when you look at the structure of why a lot of these solutions are not enacted, it's because they're complicated, there's corporate interests.
Right.
And how does that sort of,
I think ecological realism can still produce profit for particular people. It might not be the same people as the traditional definition of realism. War is profitable for some folks. It's a disaster for many more. So if I want to switch realism from traditional to ecological, then I need to say to myself, well, who are the new beneficiaries going to be? And how do these people capture government instead of the warmongers that we currently have in government, or that currently capture government with their policies and their lobbying and so on? How do we get, how do we dislodge the General Electrics of the world and get Greenpeace in there, for example? Or even Tesla. I'm agnostic on Elon Musk, but it's better than nuclear missiles. If it's driving Tesla, is fine. So if we want to change that, then we are going to have to reconsider how we make policy, which is why I think this shift here is a complement to the ecological peace building method. Yeah, we can do that from the bottom up, but policies are still coming from the top down. And in the anarchic system, it's coming from state level policies. So we need to make sure that states are recognizing this interconnectedness from an ecological point of view as to their own security. I still see that security is going to be the primary value for the foreseeable future. We just need to have, if we're persuading people that yes, a clean ecosystem is going to be a valuable tool, then there will be people that will step up. It might even be the same firms who switch their business models. Yeah, BP a number of years ago tried to rebrand themselves not as an oil company, but as an energy company. And they tried to call themselves Beyond Petroleum. It failed completely. And they went back to oil. And in fact, they've even said, oh yeah, we're not giving up oil anytime soon. Yeah, we see a scary red earth, but it's just too profitable in the short term for us. So we're gonna keep producing oil, lots and lots of it, more than ever. The United States is currently the world's largest producer and exporter of oil. So if we were able to have some policy that says you have a 97% tax on all your oil exports, then suddenly they'd be shifting real fast, something that's not taxed. So yeah, there's profit in it, yes, but there's policy that can be directing the profit to particular players, particular places, particular communities. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
A bit new to this field, so can you define what what is a realist and what do you call realism?
Sure, a realist basically is somebody who believes that the survival of the state is the key desirable factor in international affairs, right? So a lot of this stuff, a lot of these theories of realism were born out of wars. And a lot of realists argued for a strong government because they wanted to stop the killing. They're tired of this, right? The only way to prevent our people from being killed is if we're strong enough to fight off another state. And the only way to stop a civil war is if you have a strong government that can impose order. So Sun Tzu, when he wrote The Art of War, for example, Thucydides with the Melian Dialogue, there's a fascinating little play. It's like 2 pages long about what happens during the Peloponnesian War when a stronger state comes to take over a weaker island. I make my students act this out. It's hilarious. Yeah, you're talking about Hobbes, right? Just blanked on his first name. Anyway, wrote the Leviathan. Machiavelli, the Prince, right? This is a key document in realism. And he's basically saying, if you're a strong ruler, you want people to, it's okay if they love you, it's not necessary. You want them to fear you, but they can't hate you, or you'll be acting against your own impulses here. Violence is a necessary tool, but keep it slow. You don't want to overuse that, or people will start to hate you. And that you are always looking for your own security relative to your surrounding states, and you're not going to get caught up in morality. You're not going to get caught up in what the world should look like. This is what the world actually looks like. Prudence and practicality are the watchwords there. Okay, so, and this goes all the way down to Clausewitz on war. This goes down to Morgenthau, Mearsheimer, Henry Kissinger. All these folks are basically saying, there's one law and it's power. That's what a realist is. Whether it's defensive power, offensive power, whatever it is, then, okay, we have questions in the chat, excellent. That's what a realist is. And I'm saying if prudence and practicality is really your watchword, then you can't ignore scary rhetoric, or you're being an idealist. So they would add to it. Okay, let's see here. All right, do you want to read these out or should I?
No, please.
Okay, so I have one here. You spoke a little about the problems with states retaining their sovereignty in fossil fuel Earth. Low-lying Pacific Island states such as Tuvalu, yes, risk completely losing their sovereignty to rising sea levels. What does ecological realism say to the sovereignty threat faced by low-lying Pacific Island states? It won't have much to say about their future. What it is going to say is, if we had ecological realism in the past, you might not have been facing this catastrophic sea level rise problem. And I'm talking to the camera here since I guess this is an online question. But in the future, I don't know what's going to happen to places like Tuvalu. I don't see Tuvalu, Kiribati, Tonga, these islands. I don't see any form of international cooperation slowing down what's going to happen to them. The amount of carbon dioxide we're putting into the air now almost guarantees their territorial extinction. So there's nothing that ecological realism can say to help them now. We needed ecological realism 60 years ago, when we could have, or even 40 years ago, when we could have moved into renewable energy at a much greater pace. So I feel for them, I really do. We might make the argument under international humanitarian law that the inhabitants of these islands should be evacuated and resettled elsewhere. That doesn't really do anything for their territorial integrity, but it might maintain their cultural integrity. But I don't see ecological realism or any form of realism or any form of international structure at all helping them at this point. They're going sinking beneath the waves is almost a foregone conclusion at this point. That makes me sad. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So within international relations theory, realism is one paradigm, one of several. My sense is it's not necessarily the dominant one. And so I wonder why you've decided to kind of focus both your critique and your reconstruction around realism. Because in some ways, like I could also almost imagine your talk making an argument for realism against those that emphasize the kind of institutionalists that emphasize international cooperation.
Yes, I
So
am.
vaccine nationalism is I think a point for realism. The fact that the US is finally active on climate policy, in part because of rivalry with China and an attempt to build solar and other green industries that's come out of that. I think that's kind of a point for realism too. So I guess I
This form of
wonder,
realism.
no, I think it's a point for realism as a description of
Okay.
how the international sphere has worked, because the kind of, you know, if it's counterposed to the institutionalists who look a lot at the agreements and the cooperative institutions that
That's
that do
failed
exist in the
utterly as well.
international order. So I guess I wonder, like, why is realism the target? And maybe more importantly, like, how do you view what you would hope to see relative to other paradigms?
Okay, so the main paradigm I'm thinking of you've called it institutionalism. The main paradigm I think of in opposition to realism is called liberalism, small L liberalism,
Yeah,
right?
I
We're
was
not
thinking
talking.
of the same thing.
Yeah, same thing. But basically, you're talking about how institutions are useful, about how treaties and conventions and so on can set norms, right? If the log line of realism is, you know, human nature sucks, the log line for liberalism is let's all get rich. And yes, we've gotten hugely rich since we've adopted realism planet-wide after the end of World War II. But this is when we start seeing the real effects of climate change, because the profit motive embedded in liberalism basically means that you're instead of power is wealth now and not armed forces. How do we generate wealth in this you know, fossil fuel driven world with more fossil fuels, hence BP? I mean, they might as well be a state at this point. Their economy is enormous. So I don't see liberalism showing a path out of this at all. I just think this is all, if this is money driven, we're gonna have to figure out some way to make fossil fuels unprofitable. And we don't have time for that. We might do it in the future. We don't have time for this. But I think the other things you pointed out about rivalry with China being driven by traditional realism, I think that it is driven for now, and there's a climate benefit for now. Let's say China decides they're gonna stick with coal and they don't wanna be exporting wind turbines and solar panels. The United States will drop those, like, you know, they're unprofitable as well. So if there's a temporary climate benefit from realism, it's not from an underlying shift of the paradigm. It's basically because they've gained a temporary advantage over other states if they are attempting to have a climate policy. The only way you actually center a stable climate is if that is the measure of security. So I see realism in its current form, maybe providing a temporary benefit, but that won't last. This is the way to make it last. This is a transformation of what realism is. Did I answer your question? You're frowning, Mark, I didn't.
That's okay.
Okay. You can talk later if you wish. Any other questions? Have I stunned you all into silence?
So now that I learned about realism, so you're rephrasing is it right now we're trying to rephrase fighting climate change. So the same big powers can stay in power, or
Yes,
are you
well,
asking for?
they will want to stay in power. So how do we turn their desire to stay in power into fighting climate change, right? The problem with these climate treaties, like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement and so on, as much as I would love for them to be observed, they're not being observed. Every time we sign one of these, there's great fanfare, and we say, oh, now we're on the right path, and we don't go anywhere along that path. We just kind of stand there and stare at our feet like, oh yeah, but why does this keep happening? Because states are not willing to do the hard work that it's going to take to do this. And by hard work, I mean suffer an economic disadvantage. The first state, I'm sorry, I was distracted by the dog. Yeah, good job. The first state that's going to move away from fossil fuels will be at an economic disadvantage for some time until other states start to do the same. So that means that they're basically, every other state is free riding on their success, right? If I'm the United States and I cut greenhouse gas emissions, that benefit will diffuse to the whole world. I won't be able to bogart it for myself. That's going to go everywhere. So I'm giving everybody free carbon reductions, and I'm paying the economic price. So in effect, I'm giving away, socializing the benefit, privatizing the cost. That is exactly the opposite of the way you're supposed to do it under capitalism. You want to socialize the cost and privatize the benefit. So no state wants to go first. They all want to be the free rider. And from a realist perspective, this makes perfect sense. Stephen Walt wrote an article in Foreign Policy, I think a couple of years ago, saying exactly this. Here's a realist guide to fighting climate change. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, dude, you got nothing here. He basically outlines realism and then says, well, you know, realism really can't help us with regard to climate change, so we can stop carbon emissions anyway, which is no argument at all from the realist perspective. So if we are going to get states together to work on a particular issue, or at least move in the same direction, they don't have to coordinate their efforts. But if they're going the same way, it's not going to be based on profit. It's going to be based on security. That is the overriding value, I think. Profit's awesome. We love that. But when it comes down to profit or security, we'll take security first and put profit later. Does that help at all? Okay. Yes. You look like a lawyer.
Taking realism a different direction, and a different definition. Like, your one premise is you leave all fossil fuels in the ground. What does that do today? 6 years is like, oh, anyways, you're in this, if you stop the production of fossil fuels today,
Yes.
what does that mean to your economies, to feeding your people, to feeding the world?
Yeah.
When we have no gasoline to power the ships that move grain around the world, when you have no, you can't move crops from Nebraska
Yes.
to DC
Yeah.
because you don't have a transport system.
Right.
How do you,
How
do you bring these two into alignment?
Okay, I don't think we could stop fossil fuel production. I don't think we even could stop fossil fuel production immediately. But even if we did, you're arguing we don't want to because we need the energy services. But I think that's how you bring them into alignment. We don't want the coal, right? I mean, it's like a diamond, like you dig up and have it, right? You throw it in a furnace and burn it because you want the heat that comes out of it. So how else would we get heat? How else do we get transportation services? How else do we get cooling and pumping and all these other things that we use energy for? So we don't, we can move goods around. We don't have to freeze in the winter and boil in the summer, especially as the summer's getting hotter. All nations should have a chance to have energy access. And this is just a matter of international justice, whether you're a realist or not. We can look at this and say, yes, people who live in Kiribati, people who live in Niger, people who live in Peru should have just as much right to energy as people who live in the United States. So why don't we transform the energy services so that we're providing energy without the greenhouse gas externality? That's the word I'm looking for, the negative externality. It's not going to happen overnight. You have to phase it in. So as we phase out coal, we're phasing in solar panels, right? As we're phasing out gasoline, we're phasing in, this is going to be difficult, biofuels or something else, right? I mean, that's going to be hard to do. Transportation fuel is difficult. So even if we could stop producing all fossil fuels now, it's not a good idea to do that without phasing in new types of energy. But conversely, that we don't have new energy ready yet is not a reason to stop phasing out fossil fuels. We need to start this, or we're going to end up here. I mean, this is the IPCC's best guess as to what's going to happen at the end of this century, right? We're not going to live to see this, but the younger students in the room might, and your children will. We have to figure out a way to avoid that and get to at least that. And that's going to come from some discomfort in the market. And that discomfort then turns into new inventions and innovations.
But isn't Toasty Brown Earth the 6-year projection, not?
No, what the difference is here, and this can be confusing, right? Both of these are the changes over the course of a century, but that's renewable energy Earth, which is what RCP 2.6 means. So this is the best case scenario. This, if we go for renewable now and start putting algae in the gas tanks and everything we can possibly do to not use carbon, we're still looking at this level of warming. This is drill baby drill Earth, and that frightens me. I don't want that to be our legacy. Yeah, it's confusing because of the way the graph is set up, but it's not, this is 1986 and this is 2081. Both of these are changes over the course of the century.
Okay.
Yes, sir, in the back.
So I feel like this is great, and I love the provocation here, but I feel like even Toasty Brown Earth over there is in some ways incompatible with sovereignty being the unit of analysis, right? Like that even whether it's the, old school realist version or the, softer, gentler liberal version, it can either be world war or world economics, whatever, right? But it feels like it's going to take a different kind of paradigm shift to pull off that sort of coordination, that at some point it's going to take a kind of global solidarity that's not present in the existing system. So even rewiring sovereignty to have a different race to the top ethos, that we're looking to do things in a positive way instead of a pro-social way or a pro-ecological way.
Pro-security.
Pro-security, right. But that still feels like it may not, like maybe is that a bridge to a world solidarity kind of mindset, or is it
I love the
basically?
idea of world solidarity. I just don't see that happening.
But to
Maybe
pull off the energy shift you're talking about at scale would require something that I think is beyond the sort of Westphalian world order, right? Like that, the idea that nation states are still the unit of analysis.
I think, okay, I think I see where you're headed with this. No, I'm not positing that the nation state is gonna go away in the time we have, right? Maybe down the road at some point, we're gonna move beyond that to some kind of global cosmopolitan brotherhood or sisterhood, I don't know. I can't look that far in the future, but I don't need to know that we need to pick one of these two Earths now. And I don't see the norms of sovereignty and development and, you know, the nation state as going away at that point.
Right.
So we need to jujitsu them into being helpful, not harmful.
No, I get that. It just feels like even the better, less terrible
better of the
version
two, right?
still requires like that, it's like world peace is an option somehow, right? Like something
Awesome, wouldn't it?
to unleash our imaginations, because that
Yeah.
would take a paradigm shift
Yes.
beyond, I think, just tinkering with the current machinery of decision making.
I would love to have a paradigm shift of that magnitude. I don't see one coming, but that's the beauty of paradigm shifts. You don't know what's coming until they come. So maybe this whole thing will be OBE in 10 years. That, I would love that. If we move beyond the need for ecological realism and go to something a lot more, you know, brotherhood of humans, fantastic. I just don't want to put all my eggs in that basket because I think we've had utopian visions like that before and they don't pan out.
Yeah.
And this time we're effing with the earth at scale, right? It's not just, you know, this isn't just a localized problem. Now we've made it global. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for having me. I'm grateful. My email's on the last slide. Marcus can get a hold of me if anybody has any further questions. Thank you again.